everybody, you're on the LalaCraft channel. In this video I want to have a detailed showcase of the whole process I go through to create animations. By making it, I wish to help beginner animators looking for advice, as well as showcase all the difficulties an artist has to go through to people who are unaware of how animation works. Let's start. The first step is to sketch your ideas as a storyboard. It doesn't make much difference where you're working on the stage. Most people create storyboards on the computer. It lets them play around with the lines freely without being afraid to mess up and start all over again. I prefer to use pencils for sketching. It might be that I have gotten used to it after art school, but it just feels like I have more control while drawing on paper, even though there is still a risk of ruining the paper to the point that it won't be possible to work on it. Regardless, the choice is yours. It won't affect much. Just choose what's better for you. The storyboard contains pictures of where and how your characters interact, and from what angle the camera looks at them. I usually draw no more than one picture per camera angle, though there might be some exceptions. Like in this example, I've drawn two separate pictures for the same camera angle because I wanted to decide right away how the movement was going to look. Or here I have two frames of the same hand. Previously, I had done a video reference for myself so I could depict it more realistically. And you never know whether you might delete the reference or lose it, so to make it easier for myself, I drew the hand 2 times. This way, I will be able to roughly recreate the movement from the reference, even if I won't have the reference itself anymore. Speaking of the references, don't be afraid to look for them. Using them is the best way for anyone to learn. Of course, I'm not talking about stealing someone's artwork, but find multiple pictures and combine all of them to get more or less the result you are looking for. I draw each picture in separate rectangular boxes. As a result, I don't worry that part of my sketch won't fit in when I start composing them all together in the program. In addition, more often than not, especially when the animation I'm working on is a long one, I write timestamps in the corner of each box, so I know how much time this frame takes. When the storyboard is finished, I take photos of all of the pictures and upload them to my computer. From now on, I would use 3 programs: TV Paint for animation, Krita for backgrounds, and After Effects to add lights and shadows. After I add all of the frames to my new TV Paint project and place them accordingly with the music, my next step is to do wake sketches of how the movement goes and how many frames I have to draw in order for the final result to look good. It's important to note that when you do everything by yourself, alone, it's not just possible, but absolutely essential to make compromises. Otherwise, you might never finish any of your projects or get any significant results. If you struggle to imagine how the movement happens, as I've mentioned before, try getting some references of roughly what you want. It might not be perfect, but it would give you something to work with. So afterwards I go to Krita and do backgrounds based on my storyboard, which sometimes has some hints on what I want to see behind the characters. To be more precise with the placement of objects, I save a few frames as still pictures to help me estimate how big or small things should be. The coloring and style is all up to the creator, but I personally would suggest making backgrounds either lighter or darker than the characters themselves. That's a good way of helping them to stand out and not blend in with the environment. This particular shot I was doing for this video required me to have a moving background. I knew about that in advance, even when I was just sketching on paper, and so with this in mind, to make everything work, I painted the background bigger than it actually had to be, and later in TV Paint, I created a separate project, played around with the camera, and saved the version I was satisfied with. So now I had a video file with the moving background, which I could use in my animation project. So now I get back to my rough movement sketches and start drawing on top of them in separate layers. Keep in mind that it's better you give names to each layer so you won't get lost in them. It shouldn't be something long or fancy. Even the simplest names like line or color are more than good enough. Just take care of it beforehand. Though it's common to do detailed sketches after the rough movement ones and only then draw line art, I would suggest trying to make lines clean right after the first stage. It would simply save you a lot of time, which is always a good thing. Another good thing, by the way, is to pay the most attention to the keyframes, the ones that determine what is the start of an action and what's the end of it. Frames in between them are less important. They might be a bit messy since they appear for just a brief moment explicitly for the sake of making it look like the action is happening. Speaking of frames, it's quite useful to reuse the same frame twice or even more times if possible. You can do that with the use of the wrap tool. The movement still looks decent, and the fact that you didn't have to spend hours drawing a few more frames, which aren't even that important to begin with, is an absolute life changer. So as soon as the cleanup is ready, I move on to the coloring. It's best if your line art doesn't have many holes in it, because the best and fastest way to add color is to use a bucket tool. But if your lines don't connect from time to time, it would be quite problematic to make the bucket work. Either way, there might be some parts of your character that won't be colored with the bucket regardless of how good your lines are. In my case, those are ears and the hair. Mostly because of how thin they might be, the bucket simply doesn't register the space. And in this case, you need to use one of the brushes and eliminate these places manually. Along the way, you might find that there are little mistakes or omissions here and there. It's totally normal, as keeping track of literally everything is impossible, especially when there are multiple characters doing something simultaneously. Some little details and timings can and should be changed along the way when it seems necessary. Just don't overdo it. It's pretty easy to spiral down into changing every little line you think isn't perfect enough, and as harsh as that may sound, it's unlikely that anyone would look into each single frame you've done. You know there is something you don't like, but it's highly unlikely that anyone else will ever notice. Throughout the whole process, you could see is a little window in the right half of my workspace. For those who are unfamiliar, that program is called PureRef, and it's very good for having your references in front of you, in case you don't want to use a separate device to look at the photos you've prepared. So the last stage, post-production, is done in After Effects. To transfer what I've done in TV Paint, I save every layer separately as image sequences. While doing that, always remember to save each layer without any background and keep your frame rate consistent. Frame rate is how many frames you need to create per 1 second of animation. I personally use 25 frames per second. After Effects automatically changes frame rate to 30, regardless of how you saved it, so you have to manually change it back to 25 before you start working. Otherwise, your timing will change completely and the animation won't go with the music. Another thing to remember is that it's better that you don't use any numbers in the names of your sequences. Or even if you do, write them with letters, not digits themselves. Otherwise, layers with similar names like line 2 and line 1 would simply mix together. In After Effects, I put every layer in the same order as I had it in TV Paint and then start working. Most of the time I just add shadows and lighting so the overall picture looks more fancy. The easiest way to do that is to right-click on the layer which has the character color, layer styles, and then choose any of these ways of adding shadows or light. Most of the time I use inner shadow, but any of these could be useful depending on what you want. The thing to keep in mind is that you can add only one of them at a time, either shadow or light. So if you want both, add one of them first and then right-click, pre-compose, and tick the first circle. Just like that, the program will create the second version of the same layer, which you can change again, just like the first one. If you need to add something third, repeat the same process but with the second version of the layer. The process could be repeated as many times as you need. After I add light and shadow everywhere I want, I save the file. After Effects saves files as AV. This video format doesn't seem to be as flexible from what I can tell, so to finish the work completely, I use a converter to turn it to MP4. It doesn't matter a lot what converter you use, just make sure it doesn't drop down your quality, or change the frame rate. And just like that, here we go, the animation is completed and ready to be posted. By the way, this shot I've done to demonstrate the process is a part of one of my upcoming animatics, the continuation of the forest fight animatic to be precise, which I had done more than a year ago. I have much more experience now, and high hopes as to how good looking and entertaining it would be. So I would suggest everyone who has gone this far into the video to subscribe to my channel, so you won't miss any new uploads. Likes and comments are also appreciated as they help the video so it can be found by more people who might find it useful. I wish everyone success with their projects, while I return to the Blue Sky animation project, parts of which you might see in the shorts section. See ya!